So at COP21, we try to represent a research which covers pretty much all aspects of climate change, except for the hard climate modeling, which usually other groups are doing that build dedicated models to simulate the climate. But we cover a lot of the questions that are being debated here politically from a science point of view.
Okay, so what is your specialty? It is shipment, isn't it?
Yes, my own research is focused on shipping, international shipping, which emits about 1 gigaton of carbon every year, which is about 2 to 3% of the global total. So it is just one sector that faces, like all other sectors, the challenge of reducing carbon emissions and ultimately decarbonization. And so in my work, I try to tackle this question, how to achieve this.
Okay, so do you have any recommendation about how to make it better? I mean, international shipping?
Yes, there are certainly some recommendations. I guess the very first is to get serious about really tackling it, and to get serious about challenging, or to get serious about attacking the gap between where we need to be from a climate change perspective and where we're headed at the moment, and to acknowledge that there is a gap and to take the first steps of overcoming this gap. I don't have recommendations in the form of solutions, but I certainly know which are the steps that we should take in the first instance. And so I guess when you ask about recommendations, then recommendations would cover different aspects maybe. So recommendations would address policy. Recommendations would, in terms of my work, address the question of what are the technologies that we should try and pursue, what are the avenues basically to follow up in terms of research, and then finally in terms of operations and markets and businesses as well. And so what I would say is that in terms of policy, shipping is mostly regulated on the international level at the International Maritime Organization. And I think it would be, my recommendation would definitely be to try and ramp up the efforts and to try and find agreement on regulations that can have a meaningful impact beyond what we have at the moment.
So as you said, international shipping is regulated by international law. So does it mean that here at COP21, where states are negotiating together, there is nobody who has the power to propose something or to make it change?
Oh yes, people do have the power, I suppose. That said, shipping as a sector is mostly regulated at the International Maritime Organization. So it was, for example, the Kyoto Protocol mandated the IMO to deal with international shipping emissions, because it's difficult to attribute or apportion shipping emissions to individual nations. So essentially, the decision then was to say, look, let's treat shipping as a single entity of its own, and let's negotiate what's happening in shipping at the International Maritime Organization. But of course, negotiations at the International Maritime Organization are linked to what's happening here at UNFCCC on a very fundamental level. And ultimately, it's of course the same nations that sort of make the decisions, and so therefore it's very much linked.
So have you seen in every country ENDC any proposal about international shipping? Does the states seems to be concerned by these issues?
I don't think, I might be wrong because I'm not that familiar with all the nations' INDCs, and I don't have looked at all of them. As far as I know, shipping does not feature in there very prominently. I know that in the draft negotiating text, when I looked at that a few months back, aviation and shipping were mentioned specifically, and it was an open question whether shipping and whether this text would survive and whether this would end up in a final agreement. So one of the reasons I'm here is to observe what's going on this end, and to see so what the debate is around shipping and aviation, and whether anything will make it into a final agreement and what that will be. Because then, of course, that informs and affects what's going to happen at the International Maritime Organization.
So would you say that international shipping is more about enterprises and big groups of international shipping than a state level question?
Yes. So, well, yes and no. So it's still nations who debate at the International Maritime Organization, and who have interest. Of course, to some degree, they represent the interests of their national economies, and to some extent, sort of their national companies and sort of actors in shipping. But it's still the nations that make the decisions at the IMO as well. Um, in one sense, though, yes, it's more about companies. Maybe what I would say is shipping is more about companies because most people don't interact with shipping, right? So shipping is something that happens mostly on a business level, on the international oceans. And unless you happen to live in a city that has a big port, it's virtually invisible to most people.
So does any shipping company made any move to reduce its emissions or to go green?
Yes, so there are companies that are very much interested in this, straightforward from a business perspective. And I guess to some degree, every shipping company has to pay fuel costs. So therefore, fuel efficiency, which equals carbon efficiency, is on their agendas to some degree. But that may be, so that's something that, so every company has some interest of saving fuels and therefore saving emissions, but clearly that may not be enough. That may not be enough to stay within the budgets, which, from looking at the science and looking at the 2 degrees target, we need to stay within. So beyond this, some companies see this as a business opportunity, of course. So there may be, for example, container liners that get together and talk about their emissions because they feel serving other companies that ship their stuff and ultimately sell it to consumers. So I guess companies like Walmart or Nike, they want to green their business to show it to the consumer, and therefore some container liners are interested in this.
So we need a business rule in order to make this sector more green. We need some international commercial agreements. I mean, in order not to destroy the market balance.
Yes, I guess. So I think there's a twofold approach. So I think it's really important for companies to, sort of show their credentials and to make the best effort of greening their business, and then show this to the end consumer. And I think that can be an important pull. And so for people around the world, sort of be who are concerned about climate change, and rightly so, they will look at this. And so this is one channel of reaching progress in shipping. But clearly policy has to play a role as well, and ideally, obviously, on the international level, and ideally in a fair and equitable way that takes account of sort of all the various nations' interests.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.